In a small, sleepy town surrounded by dense forests and towering mountains, two escaped convicts, Jake and Marcus, were doing everything they could to stay one step ahead of the law. They had broken out of a maximum security prison 3 weeks earlier, using nothing more than a rusty spoon, some stolen bedsheets, and sheer determination. The escape itself was chaotic, guards shouting, alarms blaring. But somehow the pair managed to slip away into the night, disappearing into the wilderness like ghosts. Jake was the brawn of the duo, a muscular man with tattoos covering his arms and a temper that flared at the slightest provocation. He had been serving time for armed robbery and assault, crimes fueled by his short fuse and love for adrenaline. Marcus, on the other hand, was smaller and wiry, with sharp features and even sharper eyes. His specialty was planning. He'd spent years in prison reading books about strategy and survival, dreaming of the day he'd break free. Together, they made an unlikely team, but their shared desperation kept them together. For weeks, they survived by scavenging food from remote farms and hiding in abandoned cabins scattered throughout the forest. But freedom wasn't as sweet as they'd imagined. Constantly looking over their shoulders, sleeping in shifts to avoid capture, and eating whatever scraps they could find left them exhausted and paranoid. Every sound, a twig snapping, leaves rustling, sent their hearts racing. They knew it was only a matter of time before the authorities caught up with them. Desperation began to take its toll. One evening, as they huddled around a flickering fire inside a crumbling shed, Jake slammed his fist against the wall. "We can't keep running forever," he growled, his voice low and angry. "They're closing in on us. We need a plan." Marcus nodded thoughtfully, stroking his chin. "What we need is leverage," he said slowly. "Something, or someone, they won't risk losing." Jake frowned. "Like what?" "A hostage," Marcus replied bluntly. "Someone who matters, someone they'll do anything to protect. If we grab someone important, we can use them to negotiate our way out of this mess." At first, Jake hesitated. Taking a hostage sounded risky, especially since they were already wanted men. But Marcus's logic was hard to ignore. With no better options on the table, they reluctantly agreed to go through with the plan. The next morning, they set out to find their target. The two fugitives spent hours driving along back roads in a stolen pickup truck, searching for someone isolated enough to make their job easier. By late afternoon, their patience paid off. On a narrow, winding road surrounded by thick trees, they spotted her, a woman walking alone. She looked completely unassuming, dressed in jeans and a simple jacket, her dark hair tied back in a ponytail. She carried a backpack slung over one shoulder and seemed lost in thought, oblivious to the world around her. To Jake and Marcus, she appeared perfect. There were no cars in sight, no houses nearby. Just her, the road, and the endless forest. They exchanged a quick glance, silently confirming their decision. This was their chance. Pulling the truck onto the shoulder, they stepped out cautiously. Jake grabbed a knife he'd taken from a farmhouse days earlier, while Marcus held a makeshift weapon, a wooden bat wrapped in barbed wire. Both men approached the woman quietly, trying not to alert her until it was too late. When they were, close enough, Jake lunged forward, grabbing her arm roughly. "Don't scream," he hissed, pressing the blade of the knife against her side. "Do exactly what we say, and you won't get hurt." The woman froze, her wide eyes locking onto Jake's face. For a moment, she didn't move or speak. Then, very slowly, she nodded. "Okay," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "I'll do what you want, just don't hurt me." Satisfied, Jake shoved her toward the truck. Marcus opened the trunk, and together they forced her inside. As they slammed the lid shut, trapping her in darkness, neither man noticed the subtle shift in her demeanor. Beneath the fear, there was something else, a glimmer of calm calculation. This wasn't just any ordinary woman. Unbeknownst to Jake and Marcus, they had just kidnapped Commander Sarah Hayes, a highly trained Delta Force officer currently on leave. Sarah lay still in the cramped trunk, listening intently to every sound outside. Her mind worked quickly, analyzing the situation. These men clearly underestimated her, which gave her an advantage. Years of military training kicked in automatically, helping her stay focused despite the chaos swirling around her. She reminded herself that panicking would only make things worse. Instead, she needed to observe, adapt, and wait for the right moment to strike. As the truck rumbled down the uneven road, Sarah used her hands to feel around the confined space. The trunk smelled musty, filled with bits of dirt and debris. Her fingers brushed against something sharp, a jagged piece of metal sticking out from the rusted interior. Carefully, she began working it loose, careful not to make any noise that might alert her captors. Each movement was deliberate, each breath measured. She knew this tiny piece of metal could become her lifeline if she played her cards right. Up front, Jake and Marcus argued about their next move. Jake wanted to drive straight north, hoping to cross into Canada, where they might blend in with the crowds. Marcus disagreed, insisting they stick to the mountains. "It's safer here," he snapped. "Less people, less chance of getting caught." Their bickering gave Sarah valuable insight into their personalities. Jake was impulsive, driven by emotion rather than reason. Marcus, though smarter, was indecisive and prone to second-guessing himself. Understanding their weaknesses would be key to turning the tables on them. Hours passed and the car finally came to a stop. Sarah heard the engine cut off and doors slam shut. Moments later, the trunk lid was yanked open, revealing the dim light of dusk. Jake and Marcus pulled her out roughly, tying her hands behind her back with a lengthier rope. Despite the rough treatment, Sarah maintained her facade of helplessness. She allowed herself to stumble as they led her toward a dilapidated cabin tucked deep within the woods. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of damp wood and decay. The windows were boarded up, blocking most of the natural light. Sarah scanned the room discreetly, taking note of potential weapons and exits. Jake stood guard outside, pacing nervously, while Marcus stayed indoors, watching her closely. "You're going to help us get out of this mess," Marcus said, his tone smug. "And if you try anything stupid, you'll regret it." Sarah nodded, meek plus feigning submission. Inside, however, her mind was already formulating a plan. These men had made a grave mistake underestimating her, and soon they would learn exactly who they were dealing with. The cabin was eerily quiet, save for the occasional creak of the wooden floorboards beneath Marcus's boots. Outside, Jake paced back and forth, his silhouette visible through the cracks in the boarded-up windows. Inside, Sarah sat on a rickety chair, her hands still tied behind her back. She kept her head slightly bowed, her breathing steady, giving off the impression of someone utterly defeated. But behind that calm exterior, her mind was a whirlwind of activity. Marcus leaned against the wall, studying her with narrowed eyes. He didn't trust her, not fully. Something about the way she carried herself felt off. Most people would have been sobbing or begging for mercy by now, but this woman? She was eerily composed. Still, Marcus tried to shake off his unease. After all, what could she possibly do? She was outnumbered, outgunned, and tied up. What harm could come from letting his guard down just a little? "You know," Marcus began, breaking the silence, "this doesn't have to end badly, for you, at least." He smirked, trying to sound casual. "All we need is some cooperation. Help us get across the border, and once we're safe, we'll let you go." Sarah lifted her head slowly, meeting his gaze. Her voice trembled as she spoke, laced with fear. "I don't want any trouble," she said softly. "Just tell me what you want me to do." Her words seemed to satisfy Marcus. He relaxed slightly, leaning forward. "Good. That's real smart of you." Now, before he could finish, Sarah struck. With a sudden burst of movement, she twisted her body sideways, using the tension in the ropes binding her wrists to snap them apart. The fibers frayed and split under the pressure, years of combat training allowing her to execute the maneuver flawlessly. Before Marcus could react, Sarah sprang to her feet, grabbing the knife he had carelessly left lying on the table beside him. In one fluid motion, she pressed the blade against his throat, forcing him backward until his back hit the wall. "Tell your friend outside to come in," Sarah growled, her voice no longer trembling but cold and commanding. Gone was the frightened civilian. In her place stood a soldier ready to take control of the situation. Marcus froze, his eyes wide with shock. "But what are you doing?" he stammered, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. "You're supposed to be scared." Sarah pressed the knife harder, drawing a thin line of blood. "I'm only going to ask once," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "Call him in. Now." Outside, Jake heard the commotion and immediately rushed toward the door. He burst inside, wielding a shotgun he'd stolen during their escape. But instead of finding his partner in charge, he was met with a scene that made his blood run cold. Marcus was pinned against the wall, a knife at his throat, while the woman they had kidnapped stood between them, radiating authority. "What the hell is going on here?" Jake barked, raising the shotgun. His finger hovered over the trigger, but he hesitated, unsure of how to proceed without risking his partner's life. Sarah didn't flinch. Keeping her focus on Marcus, she spoke calmly yet firmly. "Put the gun down, or I swear I'll slit his throat right now." Jake glanced at Marcus, who nodded frantically. "Do it, man," Marcus pleaded. "She's crazy." Reluctantly, Jake lowered the shotgun and placed it on the floor. Sarah gave him a sharp look. "Kick it away," she ordered. When he complied, she turned her attention back to Marcus. "Now both of you sit down." Still holding the knife to Marcus's neck, Sarah guided him toward a chair and forced him into it. Then, without taking her eyes off either man, she retrieved the shotgun and used its strap to tie Marcus's hands behind the chair. Satisfied that he was secure, she moved to Jake, who was standing frozen in place. "Don't try anything stupid," Sarah warned, leveling the shotgun at him. "I've dealt with worse than you two clowns." Jake raised his hands defensively. Okay, we're done, just don't shoot." Sarah ignored him, quickly tying his hands with the same rope they had used on her earlier. Once both men were immobilized, she stepped back, finally allowing herself a moment to breathe. Her heart was racing, but her expression remained calm and collected. Years of high-stakes missions had taught her that adrenaline could cloud judgment, so she forced herself to stay focused. Now in control of the situation, Sarah took stock of her surroundings. The cabin was small and cluttered, with peeling wallpaper and furniture that looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. A dusty map lay spread out on the table, marked with routes leading north toward the Canadian border. Sarah studied it briefly, noting the locations of nearby towns and roads. This information would be crucial when she contacted the authorities. Her next priority was securing the men further. She searched the cabin for anything else they might use as weapons: a belt buckle, a shard of glass, even a pen. Anything sharp or sturdy enough to cut through bindings was confiscated. She also checked their pockets, finding a lighter, a pack of cigarettes, and a crumpled photo of Jake posing with a motorcycle. It was clear these men lived reckless lives, driven by impulse rather than logic. As she worked, Sarah couldn't help but notice how different the two were. Jake was brash and impatient, constantly shifting in his seat and muttering curses under his breath. Marcus, on the other hand, seemed more calculating, though fear had rendered him nearly useless. Neither man posed much of a threat now, but Sarah knew better than to underestimate them. Even cornered animals could lash out if given the chance. Once, she was confident the men were properly restrained. Sarah turned her attention to communication. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a compact satellite phone, a device she always carried, even on leave. With a few quick taps, she dialed a number she knew by heart. "This is Commander Hayes," she said when the call connected. "I'm transmitting my location now. 2 fugitives are in custody, armed and dangerous, requesting immediate extraction and backup." On the other end of the line, her commanding officer responded promptly. "Copy that, Commander. We're mobilizing a team. ETA approximately 45 minutes. Sarah ended the call and tucked the phone back into her pocket. Turning to face Jake and Marcus, she crossed her arms. "Help is on the way," she announced, her voice dripping with disdain. "And trust me, you won't enjoy what comes next." Jake glared at her, his jaw clenched. "You think you're so tough, huh? Wait till we get out of this. You won't last 5 minutes." Sarah chuckled darkly. "Oh, sweetheart, you're not getting out of this, not after tonight." For the next half hour, Sarah kept watch over her captives, ensuring they didn't attempt anything foolish. She alternated between pacing the room and checking outside for signs of approaching vehicles. The distant hum of helicopters eventually reached her ears, growing louder with each passing minute. Relief washed over her as she realized the cavalry was near. When law enforcement finally arrived, the scene was chaotic but controlled. Officers swarmed the cabin, dragging Jake and Marcus outside and loading them into separate vehicles. Paramedics tended to Sarah's minor injuries, a bruised wrist from the initial struggle and a shallow cut on her forearm, but she waved them off, insisting she was fine. Agents from various agencies surrounded her, eager to hear her account of events. Word of her bravery spread quickly. Reporters flocked to the area, desperate for an interview with the mysterious woman who had single-handed units. The arrival of law enforcement turned the quiet mountain cabin into a hive of activity. Flashing lights from police cars illuminated the surrounding trees, casting eerie shadows that danced across the forest floor. Helicopters circled overhead, their rotors slicing through the cold night air. Officers moved with precision, securing the area and ensuring Jake and Marcus were properly restrained before loading them into armored vehicles. Sarah stood outside the cabin, her arms crossed as she watched the chaos unfold. Despite everything she'd been through, she appeared remarkably calm, almost detached. Her face was smudged with dirt, her clothes torn in places, but there was an undeniable strength in her posture. She didn't look like someone who had just escaped captivity. She looked like someone who had orchestrated the entire operation herself. An FBI agent approached her, notebook in hand. "Commander Hayes," he began, his tone respectful but curious. "Can you walk us through what happened here?" Sarah nodded, her gaze steady. "It's simple," she said, her voice clear and measured. "These two men abducted me, thinking I was an easy target. They underestimated me, and that mistake cost them." The agent raised an eyebrow, clearly impressed. "Underestimated you? Most people wouldn't know where to start in a situation like this." Sarah shrugged. "Training kicks in when you need it most. Once I realized they thought I was helpless, I played along until I could turn the tables. It wasn't hard. They weren't exactly professionals." Her words drew murmurs of admiration from the officers nearby. News of her actions had already begun to spread, and whispers of Delta Force rippled through the crowd. To many, Sarah seemed almost superhuman, a real-life action hero plucked straight out of a movie script. But Sarah didn't want praise or attention. All she cared about was making sure Jake and Marcus paid for their crimes. As the authorities processed the scene, Sarah took a moment to reflect on the events of the past few hours. The adrenaline that had fueled her during the confrontation was beginning to wear off, leaving her feeling drained but satisfied. She had faced danger countless times in her career, but this was different. This time, she hadn't been wearing a uniform or following orders. She had acted alone, relying solely on her instincts and training. And she had succeeded. A paramedic approached her again, holding a first aid kit. "Ma'am, we really should take a look at those cuts," he insisted gently. "They might need stitches." Sarah glanced down at her arm where a thin line of blood had dried against her skin. "It's fine," she replied dismissively. "Just clean it up and wrap it. I've had worse." The medic hesitated but eventually nodded, knowing better than to argue with someone like her. As he worked, Sarah's mind drifted back to the two men now sitting in handcuffs inside one of the police vans. She wondered what had driven them to such desperation. Was it greed, fear, or simply the thrill of breaking free from the confines of prison walls? Whatever their reasons, Sarah knew they represented something larger, a broken system that allowed individuals like Jake and Marcus to slip through the cracks. Men like them preyed on vulnerability, targeting those they perceived as weak. But tonight, they had learned a valuable lesson. Not everyone was as defenseless as they appeared. By the time the initial investigation wrapped up, dawn was breaking over the horizon. Golden sunlight filtered through the trees, painting the world in soft hues of orange and pink. The contrast between the peaceful morning and the violence of the previous night was striking. Sarah stood at the edge of the clearing, watching as the convoy of vehicles prepared to leave. Jake and Marcus were escorted into separate vans, their heads bowed in defeat. They wouldn't see freedom again anytime soon. One of the lead agents approached Sarah, extending a hand. "Commander Hayes, on behalf of everyone here, thank you. You handled this situation with incredible skill and composure." Sarah shook his hand firmly. "Just doing my job," she said simply, "even if I wasn't technically on duty." The agent chuckled. "Still, not many people could pull off what you did. We're lucky to have someone like you on our side." Sarah offered a small smile but didn't respond. She didn't feel lucky, she felt responsible. Protecting others was why she had joined the military in the first place. Whether she was leading a team overseas or walking alone down a secluded road, her mission remained the same: to ensure justice prevailed, no matter the odds. Back in town, news of the incident spread like wildfire. Local reporters scrambled to piece together the story, interviewing witnesses and gathering details from law enforcement officials. Within hours, headlines began popping up online. "Ordinary woman takes down 2 dangerous fugitives. Heroine saves herself and maybe others. And Delta Force commander disarms escaped convicts." The media frenzy was inevitable, but Sarah tried to tune it out. She had never sought recognition for her work, and she didn't plan to start now. Her commanding officer called later that day, congratulating her on a job well done. "You've made quite the splash, Hayes," he said with a chuckle. "Everyone's talking about you." Sarah sighed, leaning back in her chair. "Sir, I didn't do this for publicity. I just did what needed to be done." "I know," he replied, his tone softening. "But sometimes recognition is part of the package. Besides, your actions remind people why we do what we do. You're an inspiration whether you like it or not." She couldn't argue with that, so she changed the subject. "What happens to Jake and Marcus now?" "They'll face additional charges for abduction and attempted murder," he explained. "With any luck, they'll spend the rest of their lives behind bars." "Good," Sarah said firmly. "That's exactly where they belong." In the days that followed, life slowly returned to normal, or as close to normal as it ever got for someone like Sarah. She resumed her routine, spending time outdoors hiking and practicing self-defense techniques. Yet the memory of that night lingered in the back of her mind, a reminder of how quickly circumstances could change. Jake and Marcus, meanwhile, sat in separate cells, awaiting trial. Their dreams of freedom had been shattered by a woman they had grossly underestimated. For them, the future was bleak, but for Sarah, it was full of possibilities. She had proven once again that she was capable of handling anything life threw her way. And deep down, she knew this wouldn't be the last time she found herself in harm's path. After all, protecting others wasn't just her duty, it was her calling. The days following the dramatic capture of Jake and Marcus were a whirlwind of activity for Sarah Hayes. While the authorities worked tirelessly to build a case against the 2 fugitives, Sarah found herself at the center of an unexpected media storm. Reporters from across the country descended on the small Appalachian town, eager to speak with the woman who had single-handedly taken down 2 dangerous criminals. Television crews set up cameras outside her temporary lodgings, and journalists knocked on doors hoping for even a brief interview. At first, Sarah tried to ignore the attention. She declined every request for a statement, focusing instead on providing detailed reports to law enforcement agencies. But the public's fascination with her story only grew. Footage of the cabin raid aired repeatedly on news channels, accompanied by glowing commentary about Sarah's bravery and skill. Social media platforms lit up with hashtags like Nair's Delta Force hero and Nair's real-life action star. People marveled at how an ordinary-looking woman had managed to outsmart and overpower 2 hardened convicts. Despite her reluctance to engage with the media circus, Sarah couldn't escape it entirely. One morning, as she stepped out of her cabin to grab some fresh air, she was immediately surrounded by reporters shouting questions. "Commander Hayes, how did you manage to escape? Were you scared? Do you think more should be done to prevent prison escapes?" Sarah raised a hand, signaling for silence. Her expression remained calm, though there was a hint of steel in her eyes. "I'm not here to give interviews," she said firmly. "My job is to protect people, not to seek fame or recognition. If you really want to honor what happened that night, focus on supporting those who dedicate their lives to keeping communities safe." Her words silenced the crowd momentarily. But the reporters weren't ready to let her go so easily. One persistent journalist pushed forward, holding up a microphone. "But Commander Hayes, isn't it true that your actions saved countless lives? Don't you feel proud of that?" Sarah paused, considering the question. Finally, she nodded, slightly. "Yes, I'm proud, but not because of me. I'm proud of the training and values instilled in me by my team and mentors. This wasn't about one person. It was about doing what's right. Anyone in my position would have done the same." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving the reporters scrambling to record her retreating figure. Though she didn't realize it at the time, her response only added to her mystique. To the public, Sarah wasn't just a hero. She was a symbol of humility, strength, and unwavering dedication. Meanwhile, Jake and Marcus sat in separate holding cells, their fates sealed. The trial was set to begin in a few weeks, and prosecutors were already building an airtight case. Evidence collected from the cabin, including weapons, stolen property, and the map marked with escape routes, painted a damning picture of their intentions. Witnesses came forward, recounting how the pair had terrorized rural communities during their time on the run. Farmers reported missing supplies, while hikers described close encounters with suspicious men lurking in the woods. For Jake, the wait was agonizing. He paced his cell endlessly, cursing under his breath and blaming Marcus for their predicament. "This is all your fault," he shouted one evening, slamming his fists against the bars. "If we hadn't stopped for that damn woman, none of this would have happened." Marcus, seated on the edge of his cot in the adjacent cell, rolled his eyes. "Oh, shut up, Jake. You're the one who insisted on taking her in the first place. Besides, how are we supposed to know she was, well, hurt?" Jake glared at him through the wall separating their cells. "Yeah, sure, blame me. That's real helpful." Their bickering continued late into the night, a stark contrast to the quiet confidence Sarah exuded. While they argued and fretted over their impending sentences, she remained focused on moving forward. For Sarah, dwelling on the past served no purpose. What mattered now was ensuring justice was served and preventing similar incidents in the future. As the trial date approached, Sarah received a formal summons to testify as a key witness. It wasn't unusual for victims of violent crimes to take the stand, but in this case, Sarah's role extended far beyond that of a typical civilian. Prosecutors saw her testimony as a cornerstone of their case, not only because she had first-hand knowledge of the events, but also because her credibility carried immense weight. On the day of the trial, Sarah arrived at the courthouse dressed in her standard-issue Delta Force uniform, a deliberate choice meant to emphasize her authority and professionalism. Cameras clicked furiously as she walked up the steps, flanked by security personnel. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with anticipation. Spectators packed the benches, eager to catch a glimpse of the woman whose name had become synonymous with courage and resilience. When called to the stand, Sarah took a deep breath and straightened her posture. Her voice rang clear and steady as she recounted the events leading up to her abduction, the harrowing hours spent in captivity, and the decisive moments when she turned the tables on her captors. She left nothing out, painting a vivid picture of both the danger posed by Jake and Marcus and the calculated precision with which she neutralized them. The defense attorneys attempted to challenge her account, questioning whether her military background gave her an unfair advantage. "Isn't it true, Commander Hayes, that most civilians wouldn't have been able to handle such a situation?" one lawyer asked pointedly. Sarah met his gaze without hesitation. "That may be true," she replied. "But the fact remains that these men chose to kidnap someone they perceived as vulnerable. Their mistake doesn't absolve them of responsibility. It highlights their recklessness. Regardless of who they targeted, their actions were criminal and unjustifiable." Her response drew murmurs of approval from the gallery. Even the judge seemed impressed, nodding thoughtfully as he scribbled notes. By the time Sarah stepped down from the witness stand, There was little doubt in anyone's mind that Jake and Marcus would face severe consequences for their crimes. In the end, the verdict came swiftly, guilty on all counts. Jake and Marcus were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As the gavel struck the bench, sealing their fate, Sarah felt a sense of closure wash over her. Justice had been served, not just for her, but for everyone who might have fallen victim to their violence if left unchecked. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed her once again, desperate for a reaction. This time, however, Sarah allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. "Today's outcome reminds us that accountability matters," she said, her tone measured but resolute. "No matter how desperate or cornered someone feels, resorting to crime will never solve anything. And for those of us tasked with protecting others, our duty is clear: to stand firm, act decisively, and never back down." Her words resonated deeply, echoing long after the cameras stopped rolling. To the world, Sarah Hayes was more than a soldier or a survivor. She was a beacon of hope, proof that even in the darkest moments, strength and integrity could prevail. The aftermath of the trial brought a strange kind of calm to Sarah Hayes' life. The whirlwind of media attention began to die down, though her name continued to pop up in conversations about heroism and resilience. People admired her not just for her physical strength but for her mental fortitude, the ability to remain composed under pressure and think strategically, even when faced with danger. Yet, for all the praise she received, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she had simply done what anyone else in her position would have done. Still, life didn't return entirely to normal. Letters poured into her mailbox from strangers across the country, some thanking her for inspiring them, others sharing their own stories of overcoming adversity. One letter, written by a young girl named Emily, stood out among the rest. "Dear Commander Hayes," it read, "I'm 10 years old, and I want to be strong like you when I grow up. My dad says women can't do tough jobs, but you proved him wrong. Thank you for showing me that I can be brave too." Sarah smiled as she folded the letter and placed it carefully in a drawer. It wasn't the first time someone had told her she was an inspiration, but this particular message struck a chord. She remembered being a child herself, dreaming of adventure and purpose, yet often hearing that certain paths weren't meant for girls. Those words had fueled her determination rather than discouraged her, and now, decades later, she realized she might be doing the same for others. While Sarah processed the impact of her actions, Jake and Marcus settled into their new reality behind bars. Their initial defiance gave way to resignation as they came to terms with the fact that freedom was no longer an option. Inmates quickly learned of their infamous escape attempt and subsequent capture, and rumors spread throughout the prison about the Delta Force woman who had bested them. Some mocked Jake and Marcus for their failure, while others regarded them with a mix of awe and pity. "You really messed with the wrong person," one inmate said during lunch, shaking his head. "If I ever meet someone like her, I'll make sure to stay far away." Jake scowled, stabbing at his food with unnecessary force. Yeah, we get it. We screwed up. No need to rub it in." Marcus, sitting across from him, remained unusually quiet. Unlike Jake, who wore his frustration openly, Marcus spent most of his time lost in thought. He replayed the events of that night over and over in his mind, analyzing every detail, searching for the moment things went wrong. Had they chosen a different target? Left the cabin sooner? Maybe, just maybe, they could have avoided capture. But deep down, Marcus knew the truth. They had underestimated Sarah Hayes, and that mistake had cost them everything. Back in the outside world, Sarah resumed her duties with renewed focus. Her leave was officially over, and she returned to active service, throwing herself into training exercises and strategic planning sessions. Her teammates welcomed her back warmly, teasing her about her newfound celebrity status. "So, Commander Action Hero," one of them joked during a debriefing session, "when are you starring in your own movie?" Sarah rolled her eyes but couldn't suppress a grin. "When Hollywood stops making bad action flicks," she quipped. "Until then, I'll stick to real missions." Her humor masked a deeper sense of purpose. The incident with Jake and Marcus had reminded her why she joined the military in the first place, to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. Every mission, every operation reinforced that commitment. Whether she was leading a team overseas or walking alone down a secluded road, her goal remained unchanged, to ensure justice prevailed, no matter the odds. Despite her dedication to her work, Sarah couldn't ignore the lingering questions raised by the case. What drove men like Jake and Marcus to commit such reckless acts? Was it poverty? Abuse? A lack of opportunity? Or was it something deeper? A fundamental disregard for human life? These thoughts weighed heavily on her mind as she attended a community outreach event hosted by the Department of Defense. The program aimed to connect service members with local residents, fostering understanding and collaboration between civilians and military personnel. As Sarah mingled with attendees, she found herself drawn to a panel discussion on criminal rehabilitation. One speaker, a former inmate turned advocate, shared his story of transformation. "I used to think violence was the only way to solve problems," he admitted. "But when I got locked up, I realized I had a choice, to keep blaming everyone else for my mistakes or to take responsibility and change. Not everyone makes the right decision, but some of us do." His words resonated with Sarah. She thought about Jake and Marcus, sitting in their cells, consumed by anger and regret. Could they ever turn their lives around? Or were they destined to remain products of their choices? After the event, Sarah approached the speaker, introducing herself. "Your story was powerful," she said. "Do you think people like Jake and Marcus stand a chance at redemption?" The man nodded thoughtfully. "It depends on them. Some guys double down on their bitterness. Others use their time to reflect and grow. Either way, it's not our job to decide. Our job is to hold them accountable and give them tools to rebuild if they choose to." Sarah mulled over his response as she drove home that evening. Accountability was important, but so was hope. If society focused solely on punishment without addressing root causes, cycles of crime would continue unchecked. Perhaps there was a role she could play in breaking that cycle, not as a soldier, but as a mentor. In the weeks that followed, Sarah began volunteering at a local youth center, teaching self-defense classes and offering guidance to teenagers. Struggling with difficult circumstances, she realized that many of these kids faced challenges similar to those she had encountered growing up. Some lacked positive role models. Others felt trapped in environments rife with violence and despair. By sharing her experiences and emphasizing the importance of discipline, perseverance, and integrity, Sarah hoped to provide them with alternatives to destructive paths. Her efforts didn't go unnoticed. Parents expressed gratitude. Teachers praised her influence, and the kids themselves looked up to her with admiration. For Sarah, it was a reminder that heroism wasn't always about grand gestures or dramatic confrontations. Sometimes it was about showing up consistently, offering support, and believing in someone's potential. As months passed, Sarah's life settled into a rhythm of service and reflection. She continued her work with the Delta Force, tackling high-stakes missions around the globe. But she also embraced her role as a mentor, finding fulfillment in helping others navigate their struggles. To her, these two aspects of her identity were interconnected, both driven by a desire to create a safer, more just world. And though she never sought recognition for her actions, Sarah understood that her story had touched countless lives. From the young girl who dreamed of bravery to the inmates pondering redemption, her journey served as a testament to the power of resilience and compassion. In a world often overshadowed by darkness, she remained a beacon of light, a true embodiment of courage and humanity. Months turned into a year, and Sarah Hayes's life continued to evolve in ways she hadn't anticipated. Her dual roles, as a Delta Force commander and a mentor to young people, became intertwined, each feeding into the other in unexpected ways. The lessons she learned from her military career shaped how she approached teaching self-defense and leadership at the youth center, while the resilience and hope she saw in the kids inspired her to tackle even the toughest missions with renewed determination. At the youth center, Sarah became a fixture, someone the kids looked forward to seeing every week. They called her Commander S, a nickname that made her chuckle but also filled her with pride. During one session, a teenage boy named Marcus, ironically sharing a name with one of her captors, approached her after class. He was quiet, his hands shoved deep into his hoodie pockets, but there was something about the way he carried himself that reminded Sarah of her younger self, determined yet unsure of where to channel that energy. "Hey, Commander S," he said hesitantly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Can I ask you something?" Sarah knelt down to meet his eye level, offering him a warm smile. "Of course. What's on your mind?" Marcus hesitated before blurting out, Do you think someone like me can ever really change? Like if I mess up, does that mean I'm stuck being bad forever?" Sarah's heart clenched. She had heard variations of this question countless times, not just from teenagers but from soldiers, inmates, and even herself during moments of doubt. She placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Listen to me, Marcus. Everyone makes mistakes. It's what you do after those mistakes that defines who you are. You're not stuck unless you choose to be. The fact that you're asking this question shows you care. That's a good start." The boy nodded slowly, a flicker of hope lighting up his face. "Thanks, Commander S. I'll try harder." "You already are," Sarah replied, standing up and giving him a playful nudge. "Now go show me some of those moves we practiced today." As Marcus ran off to join his friends, Sarah felt a surge of satisfaction. These small victories, the moments when someone realized they had the power to shape their own future, were just as meaningful to her as any mission overseas. Meanwhile, Jake and Marcus remained behind bars, their lives unfolding in stark contrast to Sarah's. Prison life had hardened them further, though in different ways. Jake spent his days lifting weights and challenging anyone who dared cross him, earning a reputation as someone not to be trifled with. His anger simmered just below the surface, ready to explode at the slightest provocation. For Jake, prison wasn't a place for reflection. It was another battleground where survival depended on dominance. Marcus, on the other hand, retreated inward. He avoided confrontations whenever possible, preferring solitude over alliances. At night, he often lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the events of that fateful evening. He couldn't stop thinking about Sarah, the calm authority in her voice, the precision of her movements, the way she had dismantled their plans without breaking a sweat. She haunted him not because of fear, but because she represented everything he could never be: disciplined, fearless, capable. One day, a counselor assigned to the prison approached Marcus during recreational time. "I hear you've been keeping to yourself lately," the counselor said, sitting across from him at a picnic table. "How are you holding up?" Marcus shrugged, his gaze fixed on the ground. "Does it matter? I'm stuck here for life anyway." "That doesn't mean you can't make the most of it," the counselor replied gently. "Some guys use their time to better themselves, learn new skills, work through past trauma, figure out why they ended up here in the first place. What about you?" For a long moment, Marcus didn't respond. Then, almost reluctantly, he admitted, "Sometimes I wonder if things would have been different if I'd made better choices." The counselor nodded encouragingly. "It's never too late to reflect on that. Maybe understanding your past can help you find peace, even if freedom isn't an option." Though Marcus didn't say much after that, the seed of introspection had been planted. Over time, he began attending counseling sessions and participating in educational programs offered by the prison. It wasn't redemption, but it was a step toward something resembling growth. Back in the outside world, Sarah received an invitation to speak at a national conference on criminal justice reform. Organizers wanted her perspective as both a victim of crime and a representative of law enforcement. Though public speaking wasn't her favorite activity, Sarah agreed, knowing the platform could amplify important conversations. On the day of the event, she stood on stage, addressing an audience of policymakers, activists, and community leaders. Her speech was concise and heartfelt, blending personal anecdotes with broader reflections on accountability and rehabilitation. When I faced Jake and Marcus that night, I didn't see monsters. I saw two men driven by desperation and poor decisions, she said, her voice steady, Yes, they committed terrible crimes, and yes, they must be held accountable. But locking them away isn't enough. We need to address the root causes of crime: poverty, lack of education, systemic inequality, if we truly want to create safer communities. Her words resonated deeply, earning a standing ovation. Afterward, attendees lined up to thank her, many expressing admiration for her balanced approach to such a complex issue. One woman, a former prosecutor turned advocate, pulled Sarah aside. "Your perspective is invaluable," she said earnestly. "We need more voices like yours in this fight." Sarah smiled modestly. "I'm just doing my part," she replied. "If sharing my story helps even one person rethink their path, then it's worth it." As the years passed, Sarah's influence continued to ripple outward. The youth center expanded its programs, thanks in part to funding secured through Sarah's advocacy efforts. Kids who once struggled with anger or self-doubt began thriving, graduating high school and pursuing careers they once thought impossible. Some credited Sarah directly for their success, sending her letters or stopping by to thank her in person. Even Jake and Marcus, worlds apart from Sarah's orbit, experienced subtle shifts. Jake eventually earned a position in the prison's maintenance crew, finding purpose in manual labor. Marcus completed several courses, earning certifications in carpentry and conflict resolution. Though neither man would ever walk free again, they discovered glimmers of dignity within the confines of their sentences. For Sarah, these developments reinforced her belief in the interconnectedness of humanity. Every action, no matter how small, carried weight. Whether it was mentoring a teenager, advocating for policy changes, or simply treating others with respect, she understood that her choices mattered, not just for herself, but for the world around her. In the end, Sarah Hayes' story wasn't just about bravery or skill. It was about resilience, compassion, and the enduring power of hope. From the mountains of Appalachia to the halls of conferences and the classrooms of youth centers, her journey served as a reminder that true strength lies not in dominating others, but in lifting them up. And though she never sought fame or glory, her legacy lived on. In the lives she touched, the systems she helped improve, and the countless individuals who dared to dream bigger because of her example. As she stood on a hilltop one crisp autumn morning, watching the sun rise over the horizon, Sarah allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. The road ahead wouldn't always be easy, but she knew she was exactly where she was meant to be, protecting, inspiring, and serving, a true embodiment of courage and humanity.